Hello and welcome to the New World Review, where today Killua has a 6th or 7th sense, a Wolfie boy starts off fully understanding what's happening, then confusing himself so much that it just makes more of a mess of the situation we're already in, and Atero makes a timely return. Okay, good. Let's get into it. Episode 110, and we have to ask the question now. Where is Palm? Where is she? Because everyone seems to be wondering that same thing, and not actually having that information cleared up is becoming suspicious now. If she's not there, where could she have gone? None of the royal guards seem to care or have mentioned it, so we can only assume she actually survived in some way, right? Meanwhile, we have Komugi sad because she thinks the king didn't tell her his name because he's not or doesn't want to be her friend, rather than not telling her because he actually doesn't know himself. The point made by the others is a very solid one. A good reason why there would be a switch in N, and a very good reason for guard changes or why the guard wouldn't be around is because the king is reproducing. What we don't actually know, or at least that I don't know, is how an ant with Ken doll-like smoothness reproduces, especially with a human. And I know that I could easily spend a lot of time philosophizing on this concept, but I really also am very aware that I shouldn't, so it's very likely that they're going to storm the palace, get all the way to the throne room, and see the most sensual, strategic game ever being played, right? Woe betide them if they accidentally kill Komugi thinking she's an ant. Oh, also we had another ant turn up that we haven't seen in a while. The one who seems to eat Nen. She was gone, but now she's back, and I'm not sure why. I really do hope she eats Nen. Forget about her though. The MVP of that scene was the ant with her who had some really intense facial emotions. Honestly, I feel like this arc would not be what it is without that specific little ant she mocks and who's like, yeah, I understand you, but I just don't have anything to say to you. Not because I can't talk, but like, you're an awful person and I'm a butler ant. The thing is though, if we're seeing her again, it means that she's about to become relevant in some way, so I guess I wonder if she can give and take Nen powers the same way Leol could, but by eating them. I really hope it's by eating them. There are a lot of ants who can manipulate other Nen powers at will, and that's such an interesting thing to be a regular behavior because it seems OP. Like, the queen must have eaten a lot of manipulators, or the kind of Nen that does that. I don't know. It seems like manipulation, but I don't know if it's, I don't know how, I've forgotten. Jumping around a little, something I'm loving about the way these last few episodes have been balanced is that we're getting closer and closer to the point at which the groups are going to meet. And part of that is knowing information they don't and questioning what information and what assumptions they would have come to. In storyboarding this, I do wonder whether Togashi did them separately and interspersed them or wrote the scenes back to back to keep track of them. That kind of thing is fascinating to me because all these characters are so individually developed and clear, and that's something I love about the series, that each of the characters of interest become fully fleshed out. The disagreements they have when they do get into them deeply come from such an informed place that we know exactly why that character made that decision. Killua, our constant suspicious companion, lives in a world where there is always something missing from an equation. But what we also know is that in this case, Killua's right. And if the others don't take his concern seriously, the ants are going to immediately win, probably. The tension I felt when Wolfie Boy decided to go stand where Nov left his portal was fairly pronounced. And I love hearing these miscommunications and potential moments of disconnect. Can we spend a moment looking at how much of a butch Australian surfy boy Wolf Boy is? And how desperate he is to be the king behind the scenes? Like, that's his phrase, I'ma be the king behind the scenes, yeah. All these characters have spent so much time trying to take over each other's positions, and the constant hiding of information is going to result in some hilarious miscommunication down the line. Especially since we now have Bizoff confused and hunting Palm, but also trying to manipulate the situation. What Togashi seems to be doing is trying to introduce so much confusion that no matter what happens, we accept it was possible. Or at least, that's what it feels like is happening. Either way, I'm expecting some seriously intense confusion on the ground level of this palace, and now that Pito can't do anything about Komugi and must stay away from the king, there are vulnerabilities in their defenses that very specifically confuse things even more. Not to mention Shia LaPerf struggling to understand that maybe the king has found a partner in life. And I think he's right, actually. Of everyone in this situation, Shia and Killua probably have the most insight into what's actually happening. I feel as though they would get on quite well if this were any other circumstance. Something that I'm noticing is that Mary's personality seems to be fraying. He keeps switching between the desire and acknowledgement of his power and the softness he wants to show Komugi, and I'm not sure which he wants to do. I'm not sure he knows which he wants to do, because he's clearly in love, right? The reality of this is that he's softening but unsure how to incorporate it into who he was, and I think there's going to be a lot of confusion between the various combatants in this, because as bad as Mary appears to be, and as bad as we were led to believe he was at the beginning, those aspects of him are cracking. He's still remarkably powerful, and he's still a callous creature toward everyone else, but the change in his behavior that revolves around his need to be an independent figure figure, and to learn who he is out of sight of the guards shouldn't be understated. It's why teenagers the world over reach an age where they want their bedroom door closed. You want to be free, to engage in all those behaviors that help you to navigate who you are and how you want to live in the world, as well as, to let off some steam. Besides, if Mary is still trying to decide what he wants to do with Komugi and he realizes that what he wants to do actually is breed with her, he probably wants to keep that process to himself, honestly. With Octobuddy becoming a spy network and Mary getting some genuine time entirely alone with Komugi, potentially to figure out what his name is, let's take a look at episode 111 and see what actually happens. 111, and it's time to go through. Speaking of time, this episode felt longer than other episodes. There is something marvelous about the use of time in shows and in combat, and I am a huge proponent of the stretching and dilation of time to engage story. This entire episode felt almost twice the length of the previous episodes, but didn't drag for a moment. As far as reviewing goes, I feel like I'm going to need to talk a little bit faster because I have so many thoughts about this that I almost can't keep up with my brain on it. Netero being so calm and so chilled and aware that he could die this whole time has been quite the blessing. And the knowledge that he can manipulate time, or maybe that he can engage the use of it through gratitude, is the most pure thing I've ever heard. There's also a really enjoyable aspect to all of this, which is the engagement of the narrator. Up to now, I felt that the narrator was narrating just for the sake of it. While they added to the story mechanically, the narration didn't alter my perception of the story. It didn't halt or extend emotion or change my feelings in any way that was meaningful. A fun thing for me is that I experienced something we call, for a lack of a better way of describing it, time blindness. I can look at my watch once and 5 minutes have passed, then look at it again, what feels like, a moment later, and 3 hours have, and I don't really have any meaningful understanding of how that happened. What it does mean, though, is that any manipulation of time in shows gives me probably a more powerful reaction than others who are aware of the consistent passage of time. Because frankly speaking, I felt like that episode lasted an hour. An enjoyable hour, but an hour, and I can feel in myself that now I am actually, funnily enough, hyper-focused. Because that's the effect. When you mess with time, when you slow it, everything that happens becomes individually important. By describing every second in those 2 minutes down to milliseconds, we sat in the minds of Pito and Netero as they learned what they learned. We sat in the mind of the old Zoldyck dude. Zoldyck. Papa Zoldyck. We traveled with Netero through his entire past and arrived with him at the point where he could competently use that skill, and I loved every minute of it. I'm not sure if this is the case, but the art of this episode was some of the most detailed and beautiful art I've seen of this arc so far. The shift in Pito's eyes was phenomenal. The use of light and shade with Netero and the depth of color in the environments was unlike anything I've seen since possibly the first arc when they emerged from the run at the beginning of the Hunter exam. It's like we've been in the dark for so long that seeing the beauty of mountains and waterfalls was a reminder that there are things outside the conflict we've been focused on, and it pulled me away from that brilliantly. And yet, despite not focusing on the psychological responses deeply, we still focused on those psychological responses deeply. Pito's entire reaction, Pito's entire response, and their one-track actions as a result of that came as a beautiful counterpoint to Netero's stillness. Because in that moment, it almost seemed as though the focus Pito had couldn't even begin to compare to the stillness and clarity Netero gave us. And that was communicated through the stillness of the art, the fracturing of lines, and the shifting of eye color that showed just how competent these characters both are, despite the situation at play. Pito's decisions and behaviors were so obvious and clear, and Shia LaPerf's single-mindedness to the exclusion of all else suddenly and immediately showed all their flaws in one moment. The plan as it's being executed is currently on point, and unexpectedly so. Is Netero 110 years old? Is that a deliberate combination with the episode number? I know it's episode 111, but if we're going to spend the whole episode on one character, I'll take that unexpected time. As I've said before, the moment you decide to involve time in a situation, we're looking at the passing of it, and every second becomes important. Here, we didn't even look at seconds, we looked at something deeper and smaller. But in those 2 2 minutes. We also had Gon dropping into the monster he is, his eyes going from the green we assume his eyes are in order to keep his color palette in check, to the flat black of someone with a task to do. Someone looking for revenge and knowing it will take work to achieve. Of course, Killua, our resident emotional teen kid, is the one who notices it, but now is the time for it to arrive, right? This episode was set up by having a ticking clock over them speaking, and it did not at all disappoint. The art was beautiful, the sound design understated, and all in all, it was an episode that is hard for me to say anything bad about, or even particularly joking about, because it drew me in just that deeply. The only moment that I found funny within my intense focus was the fact that Netero was an old man when he was a baby. He's the sort of character that's hard to place age-wise because he has that Goku thing of old as time itself and newborn behavior outside of combat. I'm not sure what the reference to Lady Guanin, but maybe we'll find out. And I'm not sure why a monster was born in his punches because they're punches of gratitude. Not knowing now doesn't mean I won't understand later though, and with fists faster than sound, I imagine there's going to be some pretty intense combat coming up. Since I don't know exactly what that combat's going to be, and I want to know, that's it from me. If you enjoyed this neurodivergent deep dive into time and focus, click here, here, and here. Hit like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.